Hey, Steve Magnante here from the Junkyard Crawl. You guys probably all know that for the last 18 years, I also do the Barrett-Jackson collector car auctions in Scottsdale, Las Vegas, Palm Beach, Florida, and Reno. Well, for the next few days, I'm going to be at the Las Vegas auction, and I won't be able to be in the junkyard to make fresh videos. So instead, what I'm going to give you is for 6 days in a row, 15-minute segments of the 90-minute video, how to build altered wheelbase funny cars. Now, this is a DVD I used to sell for $19.95. I made it back in 2007, but it still holds water today. You can actually watch a 63 Dodge Dart turn into a funny car. There's also race footage from the Wilshire Shaker. There's also a Ford Fairmont altered wheelbase car. So again, for 6 days, we'll have 15-minute episodes of how to build an altered wheelbase funny cars running from front to back. And when I get back from Barrett-Jackson, we'll get right back to the junkyard. But in the meantime, enjoy how to build altered wheelbase cars starting right now. This is a picture of the Mr. Norm's straight axle in their 65 sedan. It was a 165 miles an hour supercharged Hemi-powered match racer. What they did is they actually cut some holes in their A100 front axle to make it a little bit lighter, and it looks cooler too. So we're going to do the same thing. Dale, how are you going to do it?
Well, Steve, I got some holes marked off here with the chalk, and we're just going to use a plasma cutter. We're going to do a plunge cut and then carefully cut it out. If they could do it back in the 60s, why can't we do it today?
You got it. So we're going to cut a couple of 6-inch long holes in our front axle. We're not going to cut into the area we just welded. We're not that brave. Well, we're making good progress. So far, the front axle has been narrowed 5.5 inches. The leaf springs are welded and mounted to the car. We're actually halfway there. The nice thing I'm seeing here is that when I take the floor jack and I lift on the front axle, we see excellent caster and front shackle characteristics. Check this out. Okay, here we see 8 degrees of positive caster, which means this is going to have very similar handling characteristics to a stock A100 van, which is to say, no problem, it's excellent stuff. At the top end of the racetrack or down the road, it'll have nice self-centering characteristics of the steering wheel. And at the front, the shackle is right at about a 35-40 degree angle, which is exactly what we want to see. Now, even when we put the max wedge in this car and the front suspension settles another inch or so, these things won't change, and it'll be a nice thing. So that's an awesome place to be, but we're only halfway there. We still have to connect the stock steering box in this car to the front wheels. This is going to take a little bit of ingenuity. Now, first off, we study the past to get some ideas of what to do. This is the front suspension used under Dick Landy's 1964 Hemi Superstock and AFX car. What they did, of course, is use the A100 axle, but they merged the stock steering arms from the car into it. This looks kind of scary. What happens here is when the vehicle rises or separates from the front wheels on acceleration, I can only imagine there's going to be a bunch of toe out that's introduced. Looks scary. We'll stay away from this, but it was done. Speaking of other things that are a little bit questionable, this is the 1965 Mr. Norm's 165 mile an hour Hemi Coronet supercharged car. Well, they did a near steer arrangement. You can see the stock K-frame and steering box have been merged with the A100 straight axle and leaf springs, but they've done the near steer where basically they feed the steering inputs into the driver's side front tire with this short shaft right here. Trouble with that, once again, is bump steer. When the car body rises on acceleration or we hit bumps, it's possible that the steering wheel will be jolted by that, and it could be a kind of a scary situation. So we're going to do a cross steer on this car here. Time to get started. This is the stock A100 steering link. And because we've taken 5.5 inches out of the axle, we have to match that same 5.5 inch width reduction on our steering link. So far, Dale has cut out 5.5 inches, and he did it the nice way. Rather than cutting it out asymmetrically, he actually took out 2 1/4 on each side so that it's a nice centered weld that we'll make on our steering link. Another thing he did is he drilled some little guide holes here in the link itself so that he can insert a metal sleeve into this thing and then weld it in place and then make the weld to connect the steering link one more time. What this basically does is creates a rigid beam inside of here. This is no place for flex or weak welding. What we have right here is a temporary sort of a fixture that we've used to create the needed drag link for our cross steering arrangement. Now we've done this thing temporarily, sort of like you might use a piece of coat hanger to mock up an exhaust system, same idea. Cross steering, what is that? Well, that's a situation where the steering box, which is on the driver's side of the car, feeds steering inputs through a shaft to the passenger side front wheel. What that does basically is it creates a dampening effect so that as the car and the suspension separate or you hit bumps, there's less of an impact on the steering wheel through the road shock to the wheel. Now, this piece of thin tubing here is nothing more than a mock-up piece. We're going to make the real piece in a couple of seconds out of some heavy wall steel tubing. But first, we just want to put this on the car and confirm that it actually does what we need it to do. Want to turn the wheel, Dale, or however? Yeah, that clears the oil pan right there.
Okay.
Go ahead the other way, Dale.
Back the other way.
A little more. Go, keep going. Is that full lock, Dale?
Pretty close. There it is right there.
Yeah, perfect. Clears the oil pan. Now another thing too, this cross shaft, we have to be sure that it's parallel to the ground and parallel to the other steering shaft. That'll ensure proper ackerman and proper steering geometry. By being careful when we made our bends, we've got those features, and now we can make the real deal piece out of this piece of steel. This is the hybrid steering knuckle. What we've done basically is taken the steering arm extension from the driver's side of the A100 steering knuckle, adapted it to the passenger side of the A100 steering knuckle, welding those things together momentarily, and up here on the end, this is actually part of the steering arm extension from the Dodge Dart. This is actually a smaller hole, it's tapered. This will take the Dart's steering end, okay? This whole thing is our hybrid steering knuckle, which is going to be welded together by Dale in a second. He's going to V these mergers so we can flow in some nice arc welding and get good penetration. So this thing is as good as a one-piece forging when we're done. Get it up.
Okay, now that we've made our duplicate piece out of our original template piece that we discussed earlier, that's all said and done. We're away with that. Now we have our permanent piece ready to be mounted in. We've also taken our combination piece of 3 different parts and made it into one strong welded piece. It's actually kind of hot. I'm going to set it back down. We used the arc welder on it to get good deep penetration, and these forged pieces should never have any issue breaking. This is ready to go on. We're ready to start putting our drums back on, and the next thing we'll be addressing is plasma cutting out this area through here to make room for the next motor and the headers. And we're also going to take a portion of this out, and we're going to try to reuse this to make some new shock towers.
With the straight axle in place, we no longer have the need to retain any of the stock upper control arm mounts or the inner fender. That gives us an opportunity to get rid of this inner panel and install a set of max wedge type headers on our Dart. If we go back to history, we'll see the Esserman Dodge Rampage had a beautiful set of tubular headers that squirted out the side of the motor and went down behind the tire playing peekaboo. That is a bitchin' look that we're going to go for on this car. And in fact, when the max wedge is in here, we'll have those tubes coming out of here and running right down behind the tire. It's a really cool, funny car look. But of course, that does force the need for us to recreate the upper shock absorber locating bracket. So here's a tip on how to do that. Shock absorbers need to be run at half of their compression when the car is at its full vehicle weight. Right now we have the front suspension completely hanging. It's unloaded, so Dale, let's lift up on the axle and see where the shock absorber needs to be. Okay, that's up. Okay, this is the shock absorber at full extension. Okay, here it is, fully compressed. So halfway puts us right there. So what we'll do is we'll fabricate a tab here to locate the upper shock absorber. Dale finished up the upper shock absorber mounts here on the frame by creating just some simple structure with some plate steel. And again, we had to make sure that the shock absorber was halfway compressed with a full load on the front of it. Once that was done, he welded this on here. And under the hood, of course, the slant 6 is still in place. It's going away. Now keep in mind, our work has really just begun on this car. Not too long from now, we'll be installing a max wedge, a push-button 727 torque flight, an 8 3/4 rear axle with a spool. But until then, for 7 days' work, this car's looking pretty good. The work on this Dart is just about done. Some things we didn't show you on camera are the fact that our A100 leaf spring shackles stick out farther forward because of the 4-inch frame extension. That's okay. A lot of the old funny cars had it. So we used the plasma cutter to remove some bits of metal from the front valance. And I think this looks really cool. Kind of a Butch effect where the springs are invading the car and sticking out. It's really pretty cool. And at the front, at the wheel lip, because of the 4-inch forward relocation, we did have to take the fender and trim it. So basically, we just started out by taking the plasma cutter, removing this much metal, and then slowly just ground away. So we got a nice gradual taper here. Again, this is reminiscent of the effect used on the Kid Goat, the Rampage, and even Gene Snow's injected Hemi Dart. Looks bitchin'. Now it's time to stand back and take a look at what we've done. The completed, altered wheelbase Dodge Dart. Now our work has just begun, frankly. The car's going to come apart and get stripped and then painted and pretty much redone. However, the rough work is finished and the transformation is fantastic. So much for works in progress. Let's take a look at some completed match bash cars and the stories behind them, starting with the engine compartment of the Wilshire Shaker altered wheelbase Nova. The engine compartment of any match bash car is the second most important place, and you've got to get it right. That means only big blocks. You got to remember 1964 and 65, when these match bash cars first hit the scene with their altered wheelbases, they were all sporting the latest and greatest in factory big block power. If you're a Ford guy, that means you've got one choice. That's an FE big block, a 427 wedge, or if you got some bucks, a single overhead cam 427. Those are like 20, 30,000 bucks, but those are the two correct motors. Don't run 464s, don't run Boss 429s, they're just too new. If you can't swing the right engine, keep the hood on the car until you can. If you're a Mopar guy, max wedge motors are cool, as are race Hemis, of course, because those were the two primary engines, especially the Hemi, that were used in altered wheelbase match bash door slammers. In GM land, if you're a Pontiac guy, you're lucky. You can run a 389, a 400, 455, or a 421 if you really got the money, because they all kind of look the same on the outside. If you're a Chevy guy, well, of course, your choice is the big block. That came out in 1965 as a 396, so for our Nova, we've done that with a new GM Performance Parts 502. But what we've done is made it look like an old 396 by incorporating Corvette-style valve covers. And it sort of is a nod to the old NASCAR mystery motors and stuff, and Beswick's 421 GTO. The valve cover breathers are on these long, crazy extensions, just give it a really cool look. They don't really do anything, but they look cool. That's where we add the oil to, of course, also. Now, when it comes to the induction system, you got to get it right. There's no place in the match bash world for single 4-barrel carburetors. Again, it's temporary stuff. Leave the hood on until you can afford the right stuff. I hate to say it, but these cars are either right or they're wrong. So that means if you're going to run carburetors, you want dual quads at the very least, on a cross ram if possible, an old Mickey Thompson piece, something like that. But if you got some dough, you want to run Hilborn fuel injection. In the case of our Nova, we have a Hilborn C396E, which is basically a 8-stack direct port fuel injection, but it's electronic. We have the electronics inside the car, electromotive. This thing idles like a Corvette, but has about 560 horsepower. Puts this car into the low 11s with no problem, but we can also idle it in traffic. Keeping it cool is a Griffin aluminum radiator. This thing here, it looks small, but it's a high efficiency 2-row. This thing does the job on all but the hottest days. And for the exhaust system, because these cars are street legal, we had Doug Thorley, yep, the man himself, make us up a set of fender wall type headers that go down under the car, but then they have caps on them, and they go into a pair of Bassani dual exhausts, which hide under the car. At the track, we uncork them. On the street, we run it through the mufflers. And this car looks like it belongs at Cecil County Dragway in 1966, running fuel, but it actually can go low 11s any place, anytime, and go down the street on 91 octane. That's the beauty of this type of a match bash car. Make it streetable, but make it look right.